Welcome to everyone who's joining this session. I wish I could see your faces. I know there's a lot of you, and I'm just so grateful you're all here. Please just follow along with us, add your comments into the chat. We really want to make this as interactive as it can be. And we are going to leave room at the end of this panel for questions. So pop them in, we'll have some moderation, and we really want to hear from you. And with that, I will welcome you all to Navigating Success as a Queer Latinx in Tech. My name is Josh Torres. I have the distinct honor and privilege of moderating these amazing panelists who are here on this call with me. And with that, I am going to let them each introduce themselves, and I'm going to ask them all to share. Oh, I forgot to mention, my pronouns are he, him. I also work at Out in Tech currently, for those that are interested, which is an organization that unites all LGBTQ+ in tech. So yeah, join us, join our community. We work really closely with Techqueria to really support people in our community that have the intersections of these identities. So excited to be here. And I will kick this off by asking everyone on the panel to just introduce yourselves, your name, your pronouns, and how you identify and what your role at your company is. Alexis, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I was going to say, it's like Zoom where you're like this and then someone else. So, okay, cool. Let me see if I can do this. Hi, all. My name is Alexis Lucio. I use she, her, they, them pronouns, and I spend most of my day as the accessibility and inclusive design lead at Splunk, which means that I'm responsible for making our products accessible to folks with disabilities. I think that was it. Oh, some of my identity points. I identify as femme, queer. I'm a second-generation Mexican-American. Yeah, I think those are first-generation, high school, and college. I think all of these things have really shaped my identity, and especially growing up in predominantly white and racist areas.
So real. Thank you. Francisco, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Francisco Alegria, or Francisco Alegria. I identify as he, him. I know, right? Don't make fun of me, Alexis. I identify as he, him. I am from New York, and I am working in OkCupid as a corporate recruiter here. I guess the other ways I identify myself is also I am Guatemalan American, first generation. I am a Latin from Manhattan, hey, and I identify as a gay cisgender male. And shout out to all my chapines.
Oh, I forgot one thing. I'm coming to you today from unceded Ramaytush in Ohlone land, also known as modern-day San Francisco, California.
Right on, man. Right on.
And Francisco, I hope you are like trademarking Latin from Manhattan, because that's
actually a John Leguizamo thing, just FYI.
Oh, so. Okay. I learned how problematic it was last night, so I'm gonna.
Michael.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll go next, of course. I'm the only one left. I'll go next. Hi, everyone. Michael Tristan. He, him, his are my pronouns. I'm currently the Director of Enablement at Keep Truckin', which means I empower our sales, CS, and now support teams to do their best work. In terms of identities, Mexican-American, Latinx, Hispanic, and then queer, gay, questioning at times. I think, I'm still getting there, and I'm excited to be here and to talk about that journey, because I think, it's the journey of a lifetime. So I'm happy to share it with all of you.
Awesome.
I love that. Thanks, Michael. And that's a great segue to the next question, which I have around, if you're willing to share, we'll just start with you and keep going on that thread. Yeah. What was the journey like to get to the self-acceptance you have now, and the confident person that we see in front of us on this panel?
Yeah, I think I definitely am still on that journey, and I'm not always the most confident person that you might see on this panel. I think we all, if you're on this call, you're interested and you're probably can relate in some way to the journey. So for me, it definitely has been a journey. I think Growing up, to share a little bit more about why this was such a journey, my family was very religious, Christian. My mom was actually the pastor of a church. She started it in our living room, and it grew into a really large church, Spanish-speaking church in Santa Ana, California, SoCal. And I grew up in that environment. And so it's been, for me, just an onion of layers and layers and layers. And I know that I still have so much more to go. But I think the journey has been really, step by step. And each step, I almost, the other day I was thinking about this, it feels like compound interest. Not to relate it to a financial term, but it feels like it feels like a curve. The more I go down, the more that next onion layer comes off, the faster I get to that next step. And I think it's been so rewarding. So in terms of how I came to accept myself, I think first it was just knowing that I had these feelings that made me unique and different for as long as I remember. I mean, for all of my memories, I always knew that there was something different. Then accepting it internally to a certain extent, then sharing it with friends, then sharing it with family, and then recently sharing it with family again. Because just to give you guys one quick kind of double click, I shared it with my dad. I came out to my dad probably 7 years ago. And I realized just last year when I came out to my dad, did I really come out? Or did I say, hey, I have this shameful secret that we're never going to talk about again after this one time? And so you can, imagine there's been so many different discoveries along the path. And I think through it all, the community around me, the people that I've built up around me and my chosen family have gotten me through. So that's really at the heart of what's given me the confidence that I have today.
I love that. I mean, I think I take with me in my own journey as well. I always say we're constantly coming out all the time. I think we're not the person or the people that we were yesterday or the week before, the year before. We're always evolving and growing. So I love how you kind of frame that. Alexis, would you be willing to share a little bit about your journey?
Yeah, and I feel like Michael and I had a moment on our prep call because it always goes back to the madres. So I thought about my journey, and the best way to summarize it is I went from 0 to 100 real quick. I had a boyfriend in high school who I didn't have the language for until a decade after we dated, but is trans. And I was like, okay, well, I have such this beautiful relationship with my parents and I need to tell them like my truth. And you maybe at 16 shouldn't tell your Mexican Bible thumping Catholic mother that you're queer and like this person who is a friend is actually your friend. And it was traumatizing. She said things like, you are going against my religion. You can never see this person again. You are not my daughter. You're a disappointment. And luckily, like, shout out to my dad, like ended up bending my words somehow. And then later that night came to me and was like, what the hell were you thinking? I'm like, oh no, I just wanted you to trust me, So I actually went back in the closet and I came out again to myself because like I had a girlfriend in college, didn't tell my parents, didn't really tell anybody. And the night that the 2016 election happened, I was crying on the streets of the FIDA and I said, I can't hide who I am anymore because these are the people who are in jeopardy for the next 4 years. So I wrote, and speaking of coming out multiple times, I wrote, I am queer on Facebook. And my grandpa was like, what's queer? And I'm like, oh no, I don't want to have that conversation right now. But to Michael's point, it's come from being in community and seeing other people like me. So like, seeing Josh 2 years ago, or Erica Galeana did a panel yesterday, like seeing her sharing her coming out story and seeing, again, it's the traumatic moms. Like, I don't know what it is, but like, seeing other folks succeeding and knowing that we are here as a community for each other, and maybe there's a little less barrier to entry. And I think in being from Latin America or having Latin American ancestry and queer is a really hard mesh sometimes because we're deep in colonization of heteronormity, of gender norms, of machismo, of enredar, of gender, I said gender norms already, but like there is so much that like we ourselves have to do the work and then around us and finding folks who can make us feel safe to, again, explore ourselves. Because it's not, you're like, all right, I'm gay, like, that's it. Or like, I'm bi, like, don't have to do the work anymore. So I think it's been, and I'll say it now, such an honor to share space with folks who are watching and this panel, to know that, you know, we are here and in a country where we can say, like, yes, I hold this Latinx and queer identity, and know that, you know, we're not going to be arrested, or like, you know, there's a lower potential to be harmed than in other Latinx countries around the world.
I love that so much, in terms of constantly, you know, doing the work and being an example for our families and for our communities. I think there's so much power in that. And also in recognizing our privilege. I love that you mentioned that, you know, where we live offers us the opportunity to really live in our authenticity in a way that not everyone has the same privileges. So thank you for bringing that up, Alexis. Francisco, we'd love to hear a little bit about your journey being a Latin from Manhattan.
I think, you know, out of a lot of folks, especially coming out just in any way, shape, or form, I think I'm one of the luckiest folks that to do this, you know, from just a very loving and caring family, but also I think coming from New York City. Now, everyone's New York City experience is different, of course, in growing up in that area, but there's a thick skin, a toughness that really kind of resonated with me in a lot of ways, where when coming out, when doing a lot of things, you know, I didn't have the, I'd say a lot of vulnerable experiences when it comes to that. I think the vulnerable experience is coming to terms with it myself and hiding literally in the closet and crying to myself as a young kid, of just kind of like, well, damn, this is something new, you know? But then also knowing the fight that I was going to have to do later on, I just kind of prepared myself for it too. So mine was more of like an Athena kind of approach, is how do I strategize in telling people what I'm going to do? And I'm also different too. I'm a 6'3" guy, 200 something pounds. Like, you know, like I know how to throw a punch. I had tough sisters. So, you know, being a Latin from Manhattan, sometimes, you know, that's the stuff you got to do. You got to represent in that way. So there's times where, you know, how tough do you have to go, and how do you kind of present yourself? And the only toughness, honestly, that I had to do was, I think, more so with my mom than with the rest of my family, because, you know, gender roles in a Latinx household is very much the man is the dominant. There's machismo stuff, blah 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 blah, and actually the gender role was reversed in my household. My dad is more of the the more calmer, gentler kind of being. You know, there's a little machismo. I think every Latino man has some machismo, but he was definitely more of that caring. Not saying my mom wasn't, because she's very caring, but she's definitely the one who wore the quote unquote pants in the family. Yes, the chop, the tamale paddle chop. You know, coming out to her was a little bit more tough, but, you know, it was one of those things where I think my parents instilled in me, and again, this toughness. And I don't want to say that being tough is what's going to make you come out or whatever, you know what I mean? This is all talking about my journey, but this toughness that I had, that my parents and my mom and my sisters and all New Yorkers have instilled in me, really taught me how to just be like, all right, to embrace it as an adult and say, hey, this is who I am. No phoniness, no nothing, no whatever. And I'm not dissing on how everybody else does it, because coming out is hard. No matter who you are, no matter what you do, coming out is very, very hard, and that stays with you. But there's some things where sometimes you just have to kind of push your way through it and fight for it. And I think I came out swinging, as someone says, you know, and I think that kind of helped me with my mom specifically, and a lot of other people, you know, to the point where right now, today, like, sometimes you still second guess yourself of coming out to folks and saying, hey, should I tell them that I have a partner? Should I tell them I'm gay? But, you know, I'm 35 years old, you know, I'm grown. Like, you can't do that anymore. We're not kids anymore. And it's to the point where in order for you to be your authentic self in any aspect that you're doing as an adult, whether it's your work, whether it's your love life, whatever, you just got to be true. Not always keeping it 100 like the kids say, but you got to be true to yourself, and I think that's what helped me out too. And I think also just knowing a lot of Latinx representatives within New York City who have come out as gay, lesbian, transgender, you name it, they've helped me out in seeing that too. So I've had a lot of role models and should play in that.
I love that. I think it's so important to always emphasize how much representation matters. I think all of you being on this panel is kind of showing people how to live in their full selves. And we all had moments like that for us. So it's so, so important. I want to kind of dig a little bit deeper into something you said, Francisco, which was, coming out swinging and being a little tough. And the way I kind of took that was really creating a sense of safety for yourself, right? You wanted to be protected. And I want to shift the conversation a little bit and ask Michael, at what point did you feel comfortable coming out at work? And if you are willing to share that story.
Yeah, I think that's also been a journey. I mean, that's the theme on my side of things, is it's always a journey. I think for me, the first step was actually internal mindfulness around how I'm feeling all the time. I think it's been really interesting to if you were to ask me, do you feel safe at work? It's like, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. And it really depends on how much I've done work on myself, how aware I am of myself, how much I've affirmed myself, and really kind of laid things out and said, this is who I am. And am I shaming myself for, these things that I'm still trying to kind of undo? Or did I actually do something wrong at work today and I just need to accept responsibility and move on? There's a lot in here. And I think, how did I come out? Well, I think whenever it's natural, one of the things Francisco mentioned is you always don't know, when you shouldn't bring it up at times or when it's necessary. I think for me, a lot of the work that I've done this year has allowed me to identify opportunities that I would normally stray away from. Josh, you and I have talked about this before. On other panels, when I've been speaking, I've had that moment of opportunity where I'm like, I could say we're talking about intersectionality. I could say that I'm also queer, and I don't, and I stop. And this year, I'm so proud to say that I think based on that hard work internally through therapy, which everyone should have, all it does is gets you those tools that you need to manage yourself and to manage your environment, the way you communicate and the way you interact with it. And through the work in mindfulness that I've done this year and the past year, I found that those moments, when those kind of moments come up for me, I just push through and do it. And it reminds me a lot of what Francisco's talking about, where you just kind of have to power through. And, the way that I came out, one of the big coming out moments for me at work was I was on a panel. Or not a panel, sorry. We do we call them intersect roundtables. So whenever, once a month, or if there's any type of issue in the news, I mean, there's unfortunately so many of them these days, we hold a safe space for people to talk about how they're feeling. Similar to this, but more of an open discussion format. And we had one after, George Floyd. And so I was on that panel, and that moment came up again, that kind of moment where we're talking about all the various identities, we're talking about minorities. It seems very appropriate for me to say I'm also part of the queer community, or I am queer. And this time I noticed a clear difference. And before I even knew what I was saying, it was coming out of my mouth, because I've done that work internally. That is who I am. And so I'm going to just share it, and it doesn't matter. And I'm going to be open about it. And, I think that was such a big win for me, because I noticed immediately, the next day I was dealing with stakeholders, and, usually I'm talking I talk to everybody, I talk to my team, but I was dealing with VPs for this next meeting. And I found that I had so much more confidence in what I was saying. And I didn't have those moments of like, oh, am I saying the right thing? How do I need to phrase it? I'm so nervous. That was all gone. And not to say that it was a one and done solution and it's never going to come back, but I think for me, the journey began internally, working on myself. and then getting to that point where those moments of bravery, you can call them, or those moments of, you know, just kind of those pivotal moments, I was able to find the strength to just push through, do it, and then see the result. And for me, that's kind of a little bit of a little habit, kind of, you know, or there's kind of a trigger, and then what you do, and then the reward. And I've observed that through my mindfulness, and I think I've seen more and more of those opportunities and more of those rewards. And again, to kind of what I was saying earlier, it seems like it's a bell curve, or not a bell curve, a curve. And it seems like the rewards are just that much more rewarding each and every time.
And, you know, to tie together something that Michael and Francisco said, and if I think about my journey, like whether we are out or not out in the office is our decision based on our analysis of safety and if we feel safe around certain people. And we, as queer community members, should not force other folks to come out. You know, if that is something that you know, a person tells us, then it's our responsibility to keep that, you know, be that safe space. Like for me, you know, at Splunk, I'm like, whoa, like I'm queer, like we're here, you know, because I found the Pride Employee Resource Group, which was the first employee resource group I, you know, ever really saw. And I was having such a crappy time on my design team that I found safety, and I was able to do that. I wasn't out at my last workplace. I was terrified. I didn't know anyone who identified as queer. And just because you're not out in the workplace doesn't mean you're not queer. And I want to reiterate that, because I think there can be a lot of extreme pressure, especially around folks of the LGBTQIA community who are like, yeah, like you can also be like, yeah, and like it's okay. And it's ultimately up to you.
I love that, Alexis. I just have to say I love that, because I think not only external pressure, but I would also just mention to anybody listening, I would have needed to hear this. There's internal pressure from you too. When you see people that are queer and so beautifully proud of it, you almost go, oh, isn't that what I should be doing? Isn't that who I'm supposed to be right now? And that pressure, yes, of course, that's the goal, that's the end goal, but you do have to be compassionate to yourself and know that if you're not quite ready for that next step, find the support in the community, and it's okay, and take it one step at a time. That's what I had to do, and I'm still on the journey. But so glad that you brought that up, Alexis. Thank you.
I love the idea of taking it one step at a time, and, you know, different ultimately. You know, there really shouldn't be any shoulds, shouldn't be. Like whatever is authentic to you is your truth, and you're living it fully. So thank you for that, Michael and Alexis. Alexis, since you brought it up, I'm curious about, you know, some of the work that you've done with employee resource groups, and just by being, you know, the beautiful spirit that you are in your workplace. What are some ways that we can create more safety for those that are not often in the room, or, you know, aren't even represented on this panel? Since, you know, we all identify as cisgendered, you know, we all are queer, but we don't represent the spectrum of what it means to be queer, LGBTQ+. We represent our own personal experiences.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing this up, because I know this was something we all felt strongly about, that the Latinx bucket, there's no way of having one singular Latinx experience when Latinx encompasses 22 countries and over 400 different languages. Just like there's no monolith for LGBTQIA, right? Like we are all cisgendered folks. Like we cannot speak to the gender nonconforming, non-binary, trans, Latinx experience. And there's so many different intersections and permutations that anyone is doing themselves a disservice by being like, oh, here's the token queer person. Like you're going to represent a whole thing. So for me, part of my journey has been recognizing and developing comfort in myself and making sure that I feel safe in the workplace, then also doing my part. A big thing that I started doing with one of the teams I worked with was making sure we had our pronouns in every single document, whether that person was cisgendered, whether they were straight, whether they were queer, whether we didn't know. And I actually got feedback from someone who was now like a super close friend and joined the team a year after me. And he mentioned, like, can I tell you what it meant to see pronouns on the introduction deck? Because it showed me that this was a place where I could potentially be more of myself than I've ever been before. And it's like, one, that hurt in a good way. I was like, oh, you're welcome. And also, like, it makes me think, well, how much more can we do to make places inclusive? Like, especially as cisgendered folks, yes, we're queer, and that's like a marginalized identity, and Latinx is a marginalized identity. But, you know, if you're from a Latinx country and you're white, you have white privilege. Calling it out, recorded, right? If you're cisgender, like, stand up for your non-binary and trans coworkers. Like, you are in a position of privilege and you can make our community better. And there's often so much infighting that I'm like, y'all, the straights just see us in the same sinking ship. Like, why are we fighting with each other? So I make sure to elevate the voices of non-binary and trans peers, and like making sure that I'm giving back, and particularly to Black and Indigenous, queer, non-binary, and trans folks.
That was so beautifully said. I want to shift only because we're running low on time. You know, this panel's title is about defining success and embracing your identities as a factor in that success. And I want to ask you, Francisco, you know, how do you define success, and has that definition changed at all?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think in my 20s, I defined success of just, you know, money. I mean, this is New York, right? So, I mean, in San Francisco is the same way, where it's like everyone has to do things on money and whatever. And that's part of it, I would say, too. I think the other part, just being professional. Let's take out the Latinx, let's take out the queer part of it, too. Just being professional, of knowing what you're doing, having this, I think we'll probably come up to this soon, this imposter syndrome at some point, where you have more confidence in saying, like, okay, I've got this gig now, or got this job, and it's now blooming into this career, you know. I think that's probably another part of success into it too. I think one thing we spoke about in our panel, in our prep panel, that I really kind of not pushed, but I spoke about, I guess, kind of reiterating myself, but one thing that I spoke about was definitely, like, it's not only being knowledgeable of what you're doing, knowing, getting the paycheck, all that stuff, and growing into your experience, but also being your true self, or your more authentic self in certain things. I think we discussed this, or I just said this before, where, you know, sometimes I gave myself the Diet Coke version of what it could be. You know, I, again, used to have some acting experience, so I would, you know, say, hello, everybody, hi, you know, blah, 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 this is my voice, you know, and you know, there's a little bit more street into it, a little bit more hood sometimes, you know, not too bad, but, you know, there's more of an authentic self when you're, there's more of a success when you are more of your authentic self, because you don't have to play this mirror, you don't have to play this put this mask on, you know, and you're transparent. I think nowadays, especially too, when it comes to folks from the recruitment world, HR world, and professional world, you see this rise in transparency with a lot of people, especially these millennials, you know, Zennials and whatnot. And, you know, one thing that they can read through is some of the BS that you're presenting. So if you are trying to put this mask on and everything like that, you know, people are going to be like, so who are you? And then also when it comes to hiring and being hired into a place, they're going to be like, who are you? Why? You do the work, yeah, but you're not a cultural fit. You're not a this. And even we can, like, bash that glass ceiling when it comes to cultural fit and everything too. But the point I'm trying to make is that when you are more of your authentic self, you know, it helps out with the work that you do. I think, Michael, you said this earlier, where you had more confidence in yourself. You were able to talk to stakeholders. You were able to talk to people and not show who's boss in this authoritative way, but show this boss that, hey, you can have confidence in me as a leader to take you from point A to point B, and then of course go above and beyond afterwards. So I think that's kind of how I would define it too. And I know that's not really generalizing more so into this Latinx rainbow experience, but I'm hoping it leads into a discussion where, you know, how do we kind of call our authentic self a little bit more so.
I love that.
And why is that difficult?
I can tie it into Latinx experience, given your.
Right.
And I'm going to call out Josh here because it's a story that involves him. So I like went through my notes. It says something if Josh doesn't even remember this. I asked for a one-on-one. We met up, and I was like, what is it like to be a queer Latinx in tech? Because like I don't know what I'm doing. And one of the questions that he asked me was, you'll have to ask yourself, like, what do you want your activism career to look like? And at the time I was like, I don't know what the hell that means, but I'll just write it down, And when June 2020 happened, George Floyd was murdered. And again, it's like, I don't know how many times we have to tell you, America, that Black Lives Matter. And in being the leader of our Latinx employee resource group at work, that question all of a sudden came back into my head. And I was like, oh, this is what Josh meant. That I have enough confidence in my skill set, in the fact that I do the work. I can do this job, and I can present at times where I feel like there is an injustice happening. And my friend is a much less eloquent way. She's like, you stop giving fucks about your job and you care about just being you. And now I call out when there's ICE involvement. I call out when, someone says a really homophobic joke and people laugh, and I'm like, that's not funny. We call out, hey, like, if you're giving X amount of money to this, the women in tech group, you need to give an equal amount or more for reparations for BIPOC employee resource groups. And yeah, it puts pressure on people, but that that's coming from your truth. And that's like what success means to me. The fact that I don't have to step on eggshells. Like, I don't have to tiptoe. I live with a little less shame.
Michael, final thoughts on just living authentically and embracing your full self?
How do I top what Alexis just said? I mean, I think at the end of it, I would echo the same exact. The last phrase, Alexis, just living with less shame, is so powerful for me personally, because shame had such a hold over me for my whole life, and still does at times. I still struggle with it. So I think, if I were to go back and do this whole thing over again, and again, I'm not even done yet, but if I were to give myself advice throughout the journey, it's been just trust yourself, for God's sake. Like, what you're doing here. Like, what are you doing waiting for everyone else to figure? Going back to Francisco's thoughts around, how did you define success before? For me, it was definitely money, and definitely, moving up the ranks earlier on, but it was also, what does everybody think of me? And that makes it so that there's nothing but shame coming your way, and there's nothing but shame kind of encroaching on you as an individual. And so I think defining success to me does, to echo what both of you have eloquently said, is just being able to be free, be yourself, not worry about all of the little nuances that you have to manage to put on this persona, but just actually the work at hand, the mission that you have, the movement you're trying to drive, if that's what you're doing, the work that you're creating, if that's what you're doing. In every aspect of our lives, this plays a role, because it ties us down if we don't work through it. And so I think all I would say is you've just seen, 4 more people here that can be a part of your community if you're going through this journey. And that's the ticket. At the end of the day, it's that community, reaching out to them, getting support from someone around you, someone not around you, online, whatever it may be, or one of us, whatever it may be, to get that, rope to kind of loosen and get free and be yourself. So those would be my only thoughts.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I love that. And I will just say, I subscribe to the Brene Brown class of life,
Hell yeah.
school of life.
Hell yeah.
And she very much is like everything that you said. The community is the antidote to shame. Yeah. And being at this event is the first step. Connecting with Techqueria, connecting with all of us. Like, we are here for you. And if you are going through stuff, please reach out to people. Like, we are just your biggest cheerleaders, supporters, and I want to just give that invite of my own time. Like Alexis mentioned, she cold reached out to me after she heard me speaking on a panel, and we have had a beautiful friendship ever since. So it's amazing what can happen when you kind of just reach out to others. I want to get to audience questions, but I want to end this panel with one of my favorite questions, which is, 2020 has been a shit show. Like, I don't even know how else to describe it. It's been one thing after another, and there's so much uncertainty in the world. But my question to each of you is, what's bringing you joy in this moment, consistently? What's giving you life throughout it all?
I'd say for me, reflecting on the little wins. So every time that there's a win, whether it's with this journey that I'm on with my queer identity, I just find that there are not so many great big wins right now, but there are a hell of a lot of little ones. And so I make it kind of a practice to stop and see what those wins are.
I love that. For me, and I know Francisco mentioned our Rainbow Latinx Familia, I have really loved watching Latinx drag shows because one, like, very, very white, at least the ones who show up on TV and get all the fame, right? But seeing like these hubs from DC, San Antonio, shout out to Los Mentirosos, Brazil, like, we could not see these performers before in all their beauty and glory. So I want to highlight two shows. One is next Wednesday, Latin Explosion, hosted by a drag king, Ricky Rose out of DC. Please go watch. It's going to be an international showcase. It's going to end Hispanic Latinx Heritage Month. And then there's another one of SF Bay Area, Kings, Queens, and Things called Chillonas. That's hosted. I can't. Actually, our drag performer at the end of this conference is also going to be in that show. So, I mean, just like look it up on Twitch, look it up on Instagram, because like there's some cool stuff. And it's just so wonderful to see the blending of these two identities, because oftentimes I think we're fighting with one or the other, or we identify with neither in order to achieve safety or survival tactics or whiteness. And when you see two of them, you're like, oh, this can work. Like, why can't it work more? Why can't I be happy, like, owning these two together?
Awesome. Thanks, Alexis. So everybody can watch those shows. Francisco, what's making you smile, man?
So I guess one thing that I always think of, I try to put my dad always said, try to put a positive light on something, even if it's negative. Don't always think too negative, man. So one thing that I've kind of done is think of 2020 as a reset and a restart. And I don't know that that's not going to get through everybody, because let's be real, some people have gotten hit hard this year. But as someone who is privileged on my end right now, that's something where it's like, okay, whether it's your workout routine, whether it's your diet, or whether it's like your mental thing, start doing it as this more positive thing, like you have more time on your hand to actually become a better human being, become something a little bit better, and take yourself further. I'm in this part, my age right now, where I feel like it's not middle age. It feels like middle age to me, but it's not middle age. But it's kind of like, okay, you still have enough energy in order to pursue something, enough energy to do more things. You're still all there and have the capability. So do it. My mom would say, hazlo, mijo. So, that's something that I've been doing. So I've been taking up some sort of like coding practices and everything too, to kind of really know the technical space a little bit better. I do watch a lot of drag shows. I do watch a lot of that RuPaul stuff, though. I'm sorry, my bad on that end. But there's just a lot of stuff to do, and also there's some really great music out there. I'm a huge Kylie Minogue fan, so she's got a new album coming out. Listen to her; she is the best. It's a lot of disco stuff. So
Magic,
yes.
It's my song right now. I listened it. My friends hate me because of that song right now.
You lost me. I'm like,
Woo! Watch the video.
I'm sitting here choreographing dances to that song like I'm 13 years old. Man, I love that song.
Listen, just a lot of dancing is going to help you out through this. And I would say Kylie Minogue, start listening. That's all I got to say.
If you're not having your daily dance sessions, like, you need that little serotonin hit.
Totally. I love that. We actually have one question from Francis, the lovely Techqueria Executive Director. And she's wondering if y'all have any ideas of how Techqueria can better support cutesy BIPOC.
I want to shout out that I think Techqueria has done a really great job so far. Like turning failure into juego was a big one. There was half the panel identified as queer. Like that's how I met Josh. That's how I met Kat Perez. And like, these are still people in my life and I see as mentors because I'm like, wow, if they can do it, like, why can't I? One thing that I am learning as part of my allyship is we could do more to acknowledge Indigenous and Black erasure and anti-Blackness in the Latinx community, in the queer community. Looking at you, Castro and SF. Like, just like calling ourselves out, right? And saying like, just because, you know, my parents were racist or colorist or my ancestors were this doesn't mean that I have to continue to perpetuate that. Like I can break the chain in the intergenerational trauma and I can provide this community healing that's needed.
Definitely. Any other thoughts?
I'll be, you know, I like being a proponent for, you know, the non-colorism, not, you know, yeah. I guess, I don't know if I'd say race, maybe it's not racism within our community, but I feel like I'm calling it that way. But also I would like to say, you know, I think you know, Techqueria has really done a good job as well too. I think when it comes to the community, my hopes, especially within this chat too, has just been like, you know, you're seeing it from one point of view of being, you know, queer and Latinx in the community. And I'm hoping that this word spreads out more so. So I'm saying to the community to kind of help bring this out a little bit better because, you know, from my experiences growing up Latinx, especially in New York City, you know, there's a lot of people that are underrepresented. I'm talking about like the non-gender binary folks to the transgender folks here that should be part of our panelists, you know, coming in here because they've got some great stories to get really round out our LGBTQ plus rainbow familia, you know what I mean? So I think that's something where if we start marketing more towards get that more out more, you know, even, you know, I'm like Josh, I love that you're part of the out in tech situation. So, you know, that kind of helps with that situation because there's some voices that we need to hear, you know, other than me being a cisgender gay man, you know, who's almost passing, and let's be real, let's call it how it is, you know, like, you know, I think there's more voices to that, and I'm hoping I can help echo that and help kind of segue folks and put them in to this kind of panel. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's all so important. I have a final question because nobody's getting me off the stage. So Danilo asked, going back to Michael's statement earlier, do any of you struggle with being palatable as a queer person in the workplace? And like, how do you balance that with being out and proud? And they're really struggling with that now.
You know, this is something we talked about in the prep call, but I think there's our own stereotypes of what queer looks like, right? Like I was saying, telling these folks in the Latinx queer community, like it's either you have the cholo who like won't admit that he's out, but like, you know, is there the super high femme, the butch femme with the Macklemore haircut. And I know like 5 of my friends are like, if you say Macklemore haircut one more time, I'm gonna like, and just like the very effeminate, like Latino wears like the samba, like these are all caricatures of ways to demoralize us, right? Like you should, whatever you are, however you come, especially as, you know, one of my identities, I say queer because I make it easy on myself, but like I identify as gender fluid. And some days I am very high femme and some days I express myself very masculine. And some days like, I don't wear any of this makeup. I put my hair up, you know, and it's like a lot of, speaking of shame earlier, it's like a lot of that was just working around, why do I have these boxes in the first place? And what would my life be like if I didn't have those? And I just existed as my queer Latinx self. So I think to a point that Michael brought up, it's a lot of internal work and it's a lot of coming from a place of love of yourself, not how other people want you to behave so that it's easier for them to judge you or make perceptions and assumptions about you.
And Danilo, I would just say, I wish I had, excuse me, I wish I had an answer for you. Like, I wish that I could tell you, here's how to do it. I think it's such a, for me, still a struggle. So I'm game to take this offline and continue the discussion with you, because I do struggle with this as well. And I think, you know, at the end of the day, the hardest part about it is that a lot of it is just beating yourself up for things that, you know, for how you're interacting with other people, or, you know, I wish that people that didn't deal with this at times knew that when we leave that conversation, it's not just on to the next thing, it's on to the next thing, and examine for the next 6 hours how that interaction just went down, and what you could have said differently, and how you could have presented yourself in a way that was less this or more that. I mean, it's a real challenge. And so I think, you know, the only advice that I could possibly give at this stage in my journey is just to continue the self-compassion and to continue to pursue community. Because I just told you, and I'm definitely, I'm gonna screenshot your name right now, because we're definitely connecting, my friend. And we're gonna need to take this offline and figure out, you know, what can we do to kind of help each other? Because I really do struggle with this at times. So I would say, you know, self-compassion comes into it, because you need to monitor it and just make sure that you're not continually just beating yourself down because you don't have the perfect way of acting in every scenario. Because again, the end game here is that there's not all of these different cards that you have to play, but that you can just let them all go and just truly be yourself. But I definitely understand the challenge, and I'm here for you as community to kind of continue the discussion.
I think to add on to that too, which, you know, think of it this way, especially in a professional environment, a lot of times, a lot of people don't know how to come correct or don't know how to act, and they're having this insecurities with them too. So I think sometimes if you think of it that way too, sometimes it'll kind of alleviate some sort of pressure that you may have on yourself, knowing it's that what is that old saying that they say, you know, imagine if you're speaking in front of everybody, and you picture everybody in their underwear. You know, how vulnerable everyone might feel and everything like that too. Now, don't go picturing everybody in their underwear, y'all. But you know what I mean? But something like that, it kind of helps alleviate that certain internalized pressure on yourself too. It's not going to help at all. Like, one thing that I would be saying too, you know, kind of going on what Michael said, and also Alexis, therapy can help, y'all. Therapy can help. Sometimes that helps out with those kind of feelings as well too. But I think sometimes if you think of it and put yourself in someone else's shoes and having that empathy, you know, that could help with the struggle a little bit more.
Definitely. We are like so over time, but this is such a good conversation. To Michael's point, this is the beginning of a conversation. I believe everyone here is open to connection, and I know I am. So Francis shared this in the chat, but there is a Slack channel on Techqueria, the LGBTQ plus one. We can continue having conversations in there. You can ping us all individually on Techqueria. And I just want to say thank you to our amazing panelists, and thank you to everyone who showed up to hear this incredible conversation today.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a great weekend, y'all.
Have a great weekend. See you.